Today is actually National Book Day, so I just wanted to mention that because I read books on this channel. So while I mention that, just if you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button, and we're going to get on with this. This is Homeless College Student, Chapter 8. It's titled Free Pizza. It's always raining during funerals on TV, and it was no different for Mom's service. I wasn't in the mood for sunshine anyways. I got through it high on painkillers, sobbing like a little girl. I was fine on the drive there to Kerrville, but I totally lost it when I saw the casket and realized Mom was inside. I'll never get over what happened the last year of her life. I wish I could have saved her. I was surprised to see our father there. The look on his face made me sick to my stomach. It was the closest thing he'd ever come to smiling. He was gloating, like he'd won something. Apparently, by his disturbing reaction, Mom must have taken some of his secrets to the grave with her. He hadn't spoken to her in more than 20 years, and he never once had a nice word to say about her. Even when she lived down the street in the 3rd grade, he used to drive by and curse her under his breath. He walked up to both me and Michael, shook our hands, and said he was proud of us. If I could do it again, I wouldn't have shook his hand. I would have punched him in the stomach instead. The audacious sociopath thought we actually cared whether or not he was proud of us. After the funeral, Benny helped Michael and I clean out our storage unit and move stuff to Austin. Benny talked about how much he liked Mom and how much he liked our mom and how she was always nice to him. It was the last time I ever went to San Antonio and the second to last time I ever saw Benny. I didn't take any time off from school after she died. It wasn't an option. I forced myself to walk around and go about my routine. She wasn't dead, she was on vacation. Despite my denial, the world felt different. In the back of my mind, I knew she was gone. Continuing with college is how I coped. I'd pretend she'd get a copy of my grades every semester. Better make her proud, I'd say to myself. Michael moved in after she died, and it was good being around someone who knew what we'd gone through the last year of her life. The last year was 2003. My first year at ACC was the hardest to get through financially. Despite having somewhere to live, neither of us had a car, and we had to walk or take the bus everywhere. Taking the bus wasn't that bad, but a month after we moved in, our fridge broke and we hardly had any food. Toward the end of the semester, when my financial aid check ran out, it wasn't unusual to get through a day of classes on an empty stomach. Sometimes, in between classes, I'd head a few blocks east and get in line with the Salvation Army lunch. In minutes, I went from sitting in a classroom with college kids dressed in fashionable clothes to standing in a line at a soup kitchen with bums in rags who smelled like booze. One day, I saw someone from my developmental math course in line at one of the downtown feedings. I'm pretty sure he saw me too, but that's not an occasion where you yell out, "How about that algebra?" When I didn't feel like the breadline, I'd scour the college bulletin board for any groups, meetings, or events that advertised free food. Every Friday, I'd usually find something to go to that said free pizza. That's how I found out ACC had a student newspaper and was looking for an assistant editor. I knew working as an editor for their paper would look great on my transfer application to the Texas School of Journalism, so I put on my best clothes, walked in with a positive attitude, and straight up asked for the job. I had plenty of experience with newspapers, a perfect GPA, and a warm smile, so the all-female staff hired me on the spot. The ACC newspaper is where I brought my writing up to a college level with help from my coworkers. I'd previously always called myself a writer, but a vivid storyteller would have been more accurate. I had a patient editor who helped me improve my writing. She had more writing experience than I did, she'd been published, and she knew how to put together a student newspaper. By the end of the first semester, she had taught me more about writing than any teacher had. I worked for the paper a few hours a day, writing stories, suggesting ideas, and commenting on others' work. The editor did most of the proofreading, page layout, and everything else that goes into making a quality paper. I helped where I could, like by increasing circulation by spending a few hours a week handing out copies of the latest edition to every pretty girl I saw on campus. I wrote the editorial on page 8, I would say. I worked for their paper for a couple of semesters, but my heart wasn't in it, and I hate being cramped in an office all day. So I did everything I could to get fired because I had a guilty conscience about getting paid for such little work. I made our lack of things more obvious by going for coffee and coming back 3 hours later with cold cappuccinos, or a story about a Jamaican witch doctor I met on the drag. Other days, I'd call in sick with an absurd excuse like, I accidentally handcuffed myself to the bed. Other days, I wouldn't show up. Some days, I wouldn't show up at all. Finally, a couple months of insubordination, they fired me. Soon after that, I got another job working as a telemarketer for the Austin American-Statesman. It was in their main headquarters right off Congress Avenue overlooking Town Lake. I worked in the circulation department handling all the new and current subscribers. I was working 40 hours a week and going to school full-time. For the first time in years, things were going well. I had decent clothes, Michael and I each had a running vehicle, I had a few friends, and I even had a little money in my pocket. Other than the first month, I woke up in a bed the whole time I was at ACC. I never dreamed I enjoyed it so much. I loved learning new things and spending hours in the library going over a textbook while intermittently looking out the window. I'm sentimental, so one reason I enjoyed ACC's Rio Grande campus so much is because it was Austin's first high school, erected 100 years earlier. There were signs from the past like blue and red vintage lockers lying in the hallways, antique with dated out-of-date maps, and periodic tables that stood proudly in the back of rooms. My favorite part of the school was the old 1950s graffiti led by rebellious predecessors. One of my favorite things to do was to go through that day's obituary page in the cafeteria. I'd find all the lifelong Austin residents who'd recently passed on but went to high school in the same building I was going to college in. They ate lunch in the cafeteria I was reading about their deaths in. I imagine a lot had changed since then, but I don't think the walls, stairwells, and lockers noticed a difference. I read about how these people died 50 years after they sat where I was sitting. 99% of everyone is forgotten about 20 years after they die. Celebrities are remembered just a couple years longer. Their simply spent lives were fascinating to me. Most went to the other side of the world to fight in terrible wars during their youth. When the fighting ended, they came back to Texas, got married, and had children. They worked around Austin and started businesses. I put myself in a deep meditative state and watched them carousing the hallways like it was 1955. Streamers and posters lined the walls for that weekend sock hop. I'd be using the restroom, and out of the corner of my eye I'd see a 1950s greaser in a leather jacket sneaking in a Lucky Strike cigarette before the first bell. I savored my time in the back of classrooms, gazing out windows while the teacher lectured, knowing that the window I was looking out had had previous decades of young people doing the exact same thing. Michael and I kept up with rent and lived at the same place for 2 years. After we built up enough rental history, we decided to move to a more central part of town closer to UT. Michael worked full-time as a pizza driver, and I went to school full-time and worked full-time at the Austin American-Statesman. We had a bigger rent payment, so we tried out a few roommates to save money, but none of them worked out. Adam lived with us for a few months, but Michael didn't trust him and convinced me to kick him out with no notice. You'd think I'd be more sympathetic to a friend facing with living on the street? He'd do the same to me. We had another roommate who was a hardcore speed tweaker. He was a spoiled white 20-nothing who lived off his parents. Dude was from the suburbs of Mississippi, an aspiring musician/drug addict whose parents helped him move to Austin so he could live out his dreams of playing music and smoking meth out of broken light bulbs. Hard drugs make people think they've shared something special, but outside of their little circle, it tears real families apart. Michael and I never got along well, and it definitely got worse when Mom died, but after he started drinking, we could barely stand to be in the same room. The new roommate got Michael to experiment with hard drugs. I didn't want to go down that road, and I tried to warn him, but our new hipster roommates would invite drug fiends over while they thought they were being deep by talking about mainstream song lyrics and books they planned to read. Michael briefly thought they were cool. One morning, after I'd been drinking all night and Michael had been doing drugs, I awoke to him punching me in the arm and screaming that I used too much toilet paper. Our father used to yell at me for the same thing, but I'm not going to apologize. I deserve to use as much toilet paper as I deem necessary, and I would rather be someone who used too much toilet paper than be someone who didn't use enough. I got out of bed and dragged myself across the living room floor by his hair. Then I punched him in the gut and elbowed him in the back. He was killed over for a second with the wind knocked out of him before he picked up the phone and threatened to call 911. I ripped it out of his hand, but it was too late. He'd already pressed the 3 numbers and they traced the call. Texas law states that when cops go to a domestic violence call, even if it's just 2 twin brothers fighting over toilet paper, then they gotta take someone to jail. Michael was the one who called 911 and played the victim, so I got thrown in the back of a cop car. An hour later, I was pacing in a cage like an animal. Michael probably thought I was gonna kill him. I could handle him flipping out for me using too much toilet paper, but the way he got the cops involved was stupid. They weren't gonna help, and now I had no toilet paper. The worst part was that they weren't gonna let me out until the victim signed an affidavit stating I'm not a threat to their safety. Michael took his time with the paperwork, and I sat in jail for almost a week. I missed a big Spanish test, a few math quizzes, and the San Antonio Spurs winning an overtime basketball game in the NBA Finals. By the time I got out, Michael had left town. He knew he'd messed up, but he wasn't ever going to admit it. Years later, he'd bring it up like it was some sort of victory for him. "I sent you to jail," he said. It didn't end with my arrest and release. Even though I'd done nothing wrong, I still had to use that semester's financial aid check to pay for an attorney to clear my name. If you do a background check on me, it lists an arrest for domestic violence, but it doesn't tell you it was because of a fight with my twin brother, who was high on hard drugs, attacked me while I was asleep because I used too much toilet paper. After I paid off the attorney, got through court proceedings, and finally got caught up with my schoolwork, I still had to take anger management classes twice a week and give the instructor $60 cash before each class. Michael usually had to lend me the $60, which made it even more ironic. This was the biggest slap in the face because other than our father, Michael's the angriest person I've ever known, and I've been suggesting anger management classes for him since we were 12. I never got that far with playing guitar, but one reason I stopped was because Michael began this disturbing habit of smashing to bits every single acoustic guitar he or I ever owned. Whenever he got pissed off, whenever he got pissed off, he'd smash one. I remember him smashing my favorite red Epiphone, a 12-string Ibanez, and a poor little ukulele covered in stickers that didn't see it coming. Every car Michael has ever owned has developed a permanent dent in the steering wheel because of excessive horn use. I've seen him flick off a Lincoln Continental full of young black men, run old ladies off the road, and nudge people's bumpers at red lights. Numerous people have gone into pizza places he's worked at to complain about his road rage. There's been at least 3 incidents where Michael was giving me a ride to work or school, and I had to jump out of his car at a stop sign or red light because he'd just start pummeling me in the arm or face because I sided with someone he cut off or showed road rage toward. He took his paintings with him, so I knew he wasn't coming back. He went to San Antonio and started hanging out with our old friends from the newspaper crew, Benny and Jonathan. He still had his job in Austin delivering pizzas, so he'd drive 100 miles there and back 5 nights a week. He didn't have any bills to pay, so he spent most of the money he made on gas and booze for him and the aging newspaper crowd. Michael didn't wise up until a night with Benny and Jonathan at Canyon Lake. They got drunk and dared Michael to try to swim across. I don't think anyone has ever swum across Canyon Lake. It's one of the biggest lakes in Texas. Michael only made it 100 yards before he realized it was a death trap. He finally waddled his way close to the shore, and Jonathan just stood there while Benny helped him get out of the water. Michael showed up at my apartment in Austin a couple weeks later and explained to me what had been happening. He told me about the incident at Canyon Lake. He told me about all the hard drugs he did with Jonathan, and then he surprised me with a story about Benny locking him in a room with a fat girl who had won too many bacon martinis. We agreed it wasn't a good idea to live together, so Michael moved in with some junkie people he knew from his pizza place job. It was relieving to know he was off drugs, and I finally had a quiet place to myself where I could relax and write my UT entrance essay. I didn't apply to any other schools or fill out the paperwork to get my associate's degree. I basically had everything riding on me getting into UT. UT told me the exact time I should expect the email that let me know whether I got in. I didn't get any sleep the night before it came. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment and refreshed my laptop over and over. I'd done everything I could. If I got rejected, then I'd have to accept the fact that I tried my best and failed. When it finally appeared in my inbox, I opened it like it was a bomb and exploded when I found out I got in. I'd done what they said I couldn't do. I got into the school that was supposedly off limits for a high school dropout like me. I didn't listen to them, I listened to myself. I worked hard and accomplished what I said I would. I'd never been more proud and wanted to reward myself with a vacation. It was late May and I was about to register for my last semester at ACC summer school, but now it didn't matter if I failed every class. I'd already been accepted to UT, so as long as I was alive and in Austin by the end of the summer, I was going to be a full-time student at the only university I ever wanted to go to. The same day I got my acceptance letter, I got an eviction notice on my apartment door. I wasn't behind on rent, but they said that there had been thousands of dollars of damages to the previous unit Michael and I lived in months earlier. It came as a surprise, but apparently my new place was owned by the same company that owned the last one, so they said I had 2 weeks to come with the money or move out. I registered for all online courses for my last summer semester at ACC. After I started UT, I knew I wasn't going to have a chance to leave Austin for a few years. If I left town, even for a week, there'd be a chance that I wouldn't get back before I graduated. I didn't have a driver's license, I had traffic warrants all over Texas, and I usually had weed on me. So if I was going to go on a road trip and get it out of my system, this was going to be my last chance for a while. Having only online courses made it so I could still get a financial check and not physically have to be in a classroom in Texas. I could do my schoolwork on the road anywhere with an internet connection. That was for the ACC summer school, right before UT. The first thing I needed was a car, and I was going to spend most of my money on one. I went on Craigslist and sent all the people selling cars between $2,000 and $3,000 an email saying I'd give them $1,000 cash for it. I got a few replies and went with the one closest to the bus route. An hour later, I owned a 1991 Mazda Protege. A few days before I left, I realized I wasn't going to have as much cash as I thought, so before leaving, I made a quick stop at my drug dealer's house. I wasn't there to buy drugs, I already had plenty. I was there because I had heard that he had a bunch of fake $20 bills for sale. It was good timing, right before my trip. While I was traveling, I didn't pass any fakes on anyone that couldn't afford to take a hit. I mainly used them at major corporations and chain stores, and I'm pretty sure nobody went belly up because of little old me. The previous summer, I'd learned how to travel on the cheap from a guy I knew from the Statesman. We weren't friends and didn't even get along, but he showed me how to use campgrounds, locate hostels, and eat out of a cooler. Now I was by myself and having a much better time. I drove slow and avoided major interstates. I stayed on forgotten two-lane highways. I took my little car down desolate dirt roads made for large trucks, staying at campgrounds and national parks in New Mexico and Arizona. I spent hours meditating, smoking, and giving names to mountains and clouds. When I saw a serene spot, I'd stop and have a picnic. I had no timeline, no deadline, and no particular destination in mind. I didn't get a chance to do any schoolwork until I got to a public library in Las Vegas. It was right off the strip when you enter coming from California by the famous "Welcome to Las Vegas" sign. I did schoolwork on their computers while occasionally looking out the window at ridiculously dressed Asian tourists bustling around doing sightseeing. I finished most of that summer schoolwork in the Vegas library before heading to California. I wanted to see if I could be a Hollywood actor before I started 4 years of college, so I pulled my little Mazda through the desert and didn't stop until I got to Hollywood. The second I got out of the car, I realized it was going to be harder than I thought. I tried to crash an acting audition, but I couldn't get through the front gate. I met another guy doing the same thing, and we ended up hanging out. He took me to an abandoned house where we jumped the fence and drank beer and smoked pot for a couple hours. He said he'd been crashing auditions and squatting in abandoned houses for months. While I was in California, I camped at Malibu State Park. It's a beautiful campground nestled in between lavish million-dollar homes in the Pacific Ocean. My favorite part of the day was at dusk, when the sun went down and reminded me why I came all this way to begin with. The grocery store nearby was a Malibu hotspot full of luxury cars that I haven't even been lucky enough to look at. I was camping, eating, and shopping next to some of the nation's most famous and wealthiest people. I saw a few movie stars and they noticed me, but every famous person I tried to talk to wrote me off as a crazy homeless person. At least that's what I thought. After a week in LA, I got tickets to The Price is Right. Bob Barker was still hosting and I wanted to see him in person before he retired. I got there late, they put me in the last row, I didn't have a chance to come on down, and I didn't win the shiny new car I was dreaming about. I left the studio and sat in my Mazda in their garage, pouting. An hour later, I counted my money and saw that I was down to about $100 in cash, mostly counterfeit. It was enough to get back to Texas, but I didn't feel like leaving, so I pulled out of the CBS parking garage and drove onto Melrose Avenue. Then I lit a joint and Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen came on the radio. I cruised slowly, waving at everyone like a jackass, pretending to be a movie star while I sang, "Tramps like us, baby, we were born to run." 10 minutes later, LAP pulled my tramp ass over and I quickly threw my joint in the ashtray. 2 young cops got out of a squad car and told me I made an illegal left turn on Melrose Avenue. "I'm sorry, officer," I said. "I ain't never been to a big city before." I turned on my acting skills and put on an apologetic Texas accent. "Where I'm from, we only got one traffic light," I said. "Only reason I came here in the first place was because the psychic back home in Junction, Texas told me I win a new car if I drove all the way out here to Hollywood. That's the last time I listened to one of them." Got Ice Poseidon in the background. Okay, that's a new car, one of the cops asked. "You just come from CBS Studios?" "Yes, sir," I said, "and that Bob Barker has the whole thing rigged." They laughed, so I knew something was up. Even I'm not that funny. "Tell him about your sister," one officer said to the other. The officer gave a bashful shrug and smiled and said, "My sister won a new Jeep Cherokee on that show last month." I tried to hand the cops my worn-down 5 years expired driver's license, but they weren't interested. Instead, asked me a few more questions about the game show. We talked for a couple minutes before I tried to end it by asking directions to I-10 West. "I'm going to go straight back to Texas. I ain't coming back," I said. East. I-10 East. "That's a good idea," one of them told me. "We'll give you an escort." I got in my car and followed the cops. Another squad car got behind me and sandwiched me in. They wanted to make sure I got out of LA. I sat in gridlock traffic with the cops for a couple hours before finally reaching I-10 East, a straight shot back to Texas. I had 3 fake 20s and 2 real ones. It was enough to get back, but I'd be broke and homeless when I got there. I drove at a steady pace, only stopping for gas. I had plenty of time before the semester started, but I gave myself a cushion just in case I got arrested for no driver's license, possession of marijuana, or counterfeit 20s. I made it back without any problems and didn't run out of gas and money until I got to Kerrville. My car slowed to a stop at the exact spot I ran out of gas at years earlier coming back with Lisa and JD. Now that I was so close to Austin and UT, it didn't really matter what happened. I mean, if my car broke down or if I had to walk the rest of the way or if I got really unlucky and the cops hauled my ass to jail, I knew I could still get there on time for the first day of classes at UT. I took the gas can and walked down the access road, not really looking forward to asking strangers for money. I told myself, well, I am technically from Kerrville, this town I'm currently residing in. I got lucky and a wealthy couple in their 50s or 60s pulled over and offered me a ride. I told them about my situation, how I was about to start school at UT. I don't think they believed me, but they filled my gas and bought me a double cheeseburger anyways. I got to Austin a little after dark, out of gas and money. I needed somewhere to park until I got funds, so I drove to the crack house Michael had been renting a room at. I didn't have anyone else to greet me, and I wanted to see who he was living with. They turned out to be white trash drug addicts from some southern state, but at least he had his own room. Michael was in a good mood and invited me inside. We watched the 2006 FIFA World Cup match. He said I couldn't stay the night, but he let me lay down and take a nap. I had driven all the way to Cali and back. In the middle of the night, Michael woke up in a stupor and screamed at me to leave. I wasn't surprised, but I was so tired, stumbling down the stairs and through the parking lot until I found the backseat of my car. I crawled in and got into my usual fetal position. I'm very tall, so that was the only way I could actually fit in the back seat without being seen. I slept until the Texas heat came banging early the next morning. It was the most sleep I had since California. I felt rested, but I still hadn't showered in days, so I snuck back in the house where Michael was staying in. While everyone was still in bed, I used their filthy shower. When I got out, I spotted a basket of neatly folded clean clothes by a bedroom door and grabbed a pair of pants and a t-shirt. I still had 2 months to kill before classes at UT started, and I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I went to the drag and walked around. I hadn't done that in a while. I'd been there 100 times before, but now I was supposed to be there. I was homeless, broke, and sleeping in a $1,000 car, but I was an official University of Texas student. I roamed the hallways looking at everything closer than before. I was trying to get a read on my future. When I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, I realized I hadn't shaved or had a haircut in months. I didn't look like everyone else and figured I'd best to avoid campus until I got cleaned up, or at least had an official UT ID, official college ID. For the next week, I escaped the heat in the back corner of the Twin Oaks Branch Library on the south side of town. I hadn't been there that dirty in years, and I was trying to avoid people. It gets so hot and humid in Texas during the summer, you basically have to shower twice a day. It was embarrassing being as filthy as I was, and the last thing I wanted to do was look like that at the University of Texas. One day I was in the library reading a biography about James Dean. The writer claimed Dean lived in his green jalopy car when he first moved to California and tried to make it as an actor. When it got to be too much, he put a note on a bulletin board in a Hollywood gym explaining the situation. A few days later, a studio exec saw the note and offered him a room in his guest house. I wasn't James Dean, but I could relate to his situation, so I got on the library's computer, went on Craigslist, and put up a post that said, I need a shower, $10. I need a shower, $10. I didn't get a response, so I put a picture up with me and my shirt off, and the emails started pouring in. Most of the respondents were gay men. In fact, all of the respondents were gay men. So I made another edit. I need a shower. I am not gay. $10. I found a willing participant who lived a few miles from the library. He said he'd just built a guest shower and wanted someone to try it out and give him their opinion. It sounded too good to be true, but he said it was safe, he wasn't crazy, and for me not to feel weird about the situation. There was no way this was going to feel anything but weird. I found the address and drove past the house a few times, checking out before finally honking my horn, getting out of my car, and gingerly waving a $10 bill in the air like, here's $10, one shower. A small, bold, older guy came to the door with a towel in his hand. I gave him a once-over and determined he wasn't a rapist or killer, but I still wasn't sure how this would pan out. He shook my hand, introduced himself, and told me he worked as a drug counselor for troubled teens. I don't normally do this kind of thing, he said in a lispy voice, or I don't normally do in a lispy voice, but I built this shower myself, and I like it, and I want another opinion. I can do that, I said. He showed me the bathroom where I found a shower built for someone better than me. It was a walk-in with a double-glass decorative door. There was a huge water spout with a bunch of different pressure settings, and the entire structure was chiseled from a huge slab of shiny rock. There was even a seat to sit down on and relax under the free-flowing water. I was in there for an hour, and it took 20 minutes just to figure out the controls. When I got out, I tried to hand him my money, but he refused. He cleared his throat and asked me to sit down. You could tell he was going to say something he'd been planning while I was in the shower. Now, I don't know you and you don't know me, he said, but I've been trying to find a decent roommate on Craigslist for 3 months. And I know you don't have any money and you're living in your car, but you seem like a trustworthy person, and I want to offer my help. Are you asking me to move in? I have an extra bedroom you can use, he said. I know you won't have any money until school starts, but I could use someone here while I'm at work. I have a 6-month-old black lab and I work 12 hours a day. Oh, I love dogs, I said. She'll like you too, he said. She needs someone to play with. I can do that. All right, well, you can move in then, he said, but under no circumstances can you bring any drugs in this house. Oh, okay. I could lose my job, he said. While we were talking, you could hear his dog going crazy in the back room. The pooch was about to bust the door off its hinges. The puppy knew the best play pal he could find was on the other side of the door. I was excited to meet him too, but the guy had one last thing to tell me and said it was important. Before you agree, there's something you should know. I couldn't think of anything he'd say that changed things. I'm gay, he said. Yes, I figured that, I said, trying not to laugh. I went to the backyard and met the dog. When I came back an hour later, he showed me to my new furnished room. I hadn't slept in a bed in years and must have been out for 2 days. When I woke up, I went in the living room and sat in front of a TV that was blasting an obnoxious reality show where the contestants danced around like giddy morons. I put my feet up and breathed a sigh of relief. I was back indoors. The following week was orientation at UT. It's a big fiasco where they help new students register for classes, sign up for insurance, and print out their official University of Texas ID card. The ID was the only thing I was looking forward to. I'd gone years without any valid ID, and obviously having one would open doors and help me get a job. The orientation process was handled by other UT students, so it wasn't hard to convince them I was who I was without any actual proof. By the end of the day, I had my official UT ID card. UT ID cards move a lot of ground in Austin. All UT students, staff, and faculty have identical looking cards, with the only difference being their picture. They get to ride all city buses for free, even the fast and more expensive express buses with their shiny picture ID. When they get on a bus, everyone knows they're UT because they pull out a laminated card and swipe it through the machine. Everyone else has to try to shove their crinkled dollar bills in the acceptor, either that or visually show a crumpled piece of paper transfer ticket like, please sir, I got this little piece of paper, let me ride. UT students get discounts on restaurants, bars, strip clubs, and dance halls all over the state. Owners of places know that UT students have money to spend. In my opinion, the idea of a poor college student is an oxymoron. University students have more disposable income than any other demographic besides little kids and retirees. By late June, I'd gotten comfortable in my new house, mainly because the gay guy worked all day and I had the place to myself. He'd get home late in the afternoon and we'd drink beer and watch reality TV for a few hours before he went to sleep. After I was sure he was out, I'd break out my bag of pot and smoke in his backyard under the stars. I'd sit there for hours laughing about how I was living in a nice house. When I wanted to smoke weed during the day, I'd roll a few joints in my room, get in my car, and drive around South Austin. I figured I'd be okay as long as I didn't smoke in front of him or let him know about it. I tried to be careful and hide everything, but one night I drank too many Heinekens and left a pile of stems on a magazine in the living room. The next day was Saturday and the guy didn't go to work. I slept until noon, which was typical for me at the time, but he waited patiently for me to get up. When I did, he asked me to sit down. He looked angry and asked if there was anything I wanted to tell him. I really couldn't think of anything, so I said, no. Then he swiped the magazine from under a newspaper and stems and seeds went spilling all over the floor. Oh, sorry, I said. I smoked a little pot on the porch last night. It won't happen again. He looked me over and harshly said, you're right, it won't happen again, because I want you out of this house. Get your stuff and get out. I've been caught, and I couldn't put up an argument because I hadn't paid any rent, and he did say I couldn't bring any weed into the house. I didn't have time to convince the guy about the beneficiary use of cannabis, and I wasn't going to make this into a big thing like he'd hoped. I stood up and said, okay, that's cool. I appreciate you letting me stay here. I hope you find someone else. Dude was perplexed. I suppose he expected me to throw a dramatic temper tantrum. That wasn't happening. I appreciated the brief period he'd given me out of my car, but that was about it. Arguing with him would have only added to the stress I knew I was about to endure. I'm glad you're handling this so well, he said, stuttering. It's no problem, I told him. I was just happy to get out of the heat for a little bit. I left his house and went to visit Michael. I told Michael what happened. He told me I should have told the guy off. You're never going to see him again anyways, Michael said. You might as well curse him out. I'm surprised you're taking it so well. I have things to look forward to, remember? I already made it through most of the summer. I start UT in a couple months. When do you get your financial aid money? Michael asked. Right before the semester starts. What are you going to do till then? He asked. Survive. You're going to need money, he said. How about we use your car and get a newspaper route? I don't even have a driver's license. I want to be cautious. You don't need a driver's license, he said. We'll get the route in my name, but use your car. They don't have to know about you. You're just a helper. I don't know, I said. UT starts in 2 months. Come on, he said. You can work under the table. You like that. He made a good point, but I'd done previous newspaper routes and knew how hard it was. You make less than minimum wage, you have to get up at 3 a.m. or earlier, and you don't ever get a day off. All that's on top of the physical labor it takes to roll each individual paper, cover them with plastic, and then heave them across driveways, window sills, and parking lots. I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I needed something. Look, if you help me deliver the paper and we use your car, he said, I'll sneak you in my room every night and you can stretch out, indoors. The next night we drove to the main newspaper place. We were younger and more clean-cut than the rest of the carriers, so they gave us a cushy route in Tarrytown. If you're going to throw papers, it's better to be in a rich neighborhood. More houses get it delivered and carriers get paid by the number of papers they throw. You drive less and it's a shorter shift. Another reason it's a lot more fun cruising around nice mansions on wide streets where it's quiet and everyone's asleep than it is to drive through the ghetto searching for the one house that gets the paper delivered, hoping not to run into any of the late night ghetto crooks. The next week I ran into Adam in front of the downtown library. He was waiting for a bus while I was driving by. I pulled over and offered him a ride. I remember it was over 100 degrees outside. The last time I saw Adam, I was showing him where the ACC Financial Aid office was at their downtown campus. This was over a year earlier, and he was excited to tell me he was about to start community college. Adam didn't smoke weed, but whenever we saw each other, we'd break out in laughter, usually if we hadn't seen each other in a while. Uninhibited laughter is proof you have a good friend. After I gave him a ride to his public housing projects, he said I could sleep on his couch until school started. I was thrilled to get off the street, but I played it cool and didn't show too much enthusiasm in front of my tough friend from New York City. The first night there, we stayed up late talking about college. I told Adam all the inside information he'd need to know about ACC, and he showed me a new website which he thought was going to take over the internet called YouTube. About a week later, Adam got tired of me staying there. He started asking for money. I couldn't believe it. He knew I wasn't making peanuts delivering the paper, and the government paid his rent. He had a free apartment, he was getting financial aid, and he was on food stamps. I told him I'd give him $400 when the semester started. I was only at his place in the morning after I finished the delivering the paper with Michael. I'd get to his projects as the sun was coming up and lay down on his filthy couch with that day's copy of the New York Times. He'd be asleep in the bedroom, and I'd read the paper for an hour while watching PBS on the 1980s big screen TV he got free from Craigslist. I'd fall asleep sometime around noon and wake up a few hours later, ready for another night of newspaper delivery. For the next month, Michael and I delivered the Austin American-Statesman to all the highbrow residents of Tarrytown. There's nothing like driving slow in elite neighborhoods at 4 a.m., smoking pot, listening to college radio, and heating newspapers like madmen. Sleep deprivation mimics psychosis, and sometimes you feel like you're on a profound acid trip. You grasp ideas normally out of reach. There's a collective consciousness we all share, and when you're up very late and everyone else is asleep, you're processing stimuli others are missing. Moments of solace like this are few and far between. You could live 100 years and never notice having one, but they're there. I remember one morning after a long night of throwing the Sunday paper, Michael turned to me and acknowledged what I had accomplished. "That's crazy," he said. "You made it to UT. You actually did what you said you were going to do," he said. "Nobody thought you could do it, not even Mom, but somehow you did. You, of all people." I was shocked by my twin's kind words, but Michael was the only one who had any idea what I'd gone through to get where I was at. That was Chapter 8 of the wonderful book, Homeless College Student. You can also find it under Gonzo Education. It's about my life. It starts when I drop out of high school and ends when I graduate from one of the top universities. It's a great book that I spent over 5,000 hours working on, and it's going to be a bestseller. So get on it quick, and you can tell people you're one of the first people to read it. So I appreciate you listening. If you haven't already, click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and thanks for watching.